welcome back to episode 13 of On the Court webinars. Introducing today, got Jonny Sim, who's going to talk about futsal goalkeeping, on techniques and decision making. A really experienced guy within the game. Plays currently for England, albeit that he's been sidelined half the season with injury. Recently signed for us at Pro this year. One of the humblest guys I've met, and didn't realise his capabilities and potential really until I saw him on a day-to-day sort of basis at training. I think he's probably one of the top keepers that I've ever seen or been had involved with us. So it's a real pleasure for him to do this for us today. Hopefully he can give you guys some insight into his technical stuff, how he's gone about learning it, but also the important factors of goalkeeper, which is the psychology and the decision making, and actually implementing that on court itself. So as I say, he's worked at the top level. Really good guy, and I'll let him take it from here.
Right, thanks, Juan. First, thanks for having me on. I'm hoping I can give you some useful insight into being a futsal goalkeeper. And like the name of the presentation suggests, I'm kind of focusing not just purely on technique, but the decision-making processes behind the techniques. A little bit about myself. So I've played futsal for 9 years now. Like many, I was kind of introduced to the sport at university, played in the Bucks leagues, and I went on to play in the National League first of all for Leeds and New York. Moved down to London United of Essia, and now, as Juan said, at Pro Futsal. I've been in the England senior squad since 2015, and I've had some really top level coaches along the way who've taught me a hell of a lot. So I want to try and pass on some of the key learnings tonight. So I'm not a qualified coach, but this is going to be very much a player perspective of what I do to work on my techniques, my decisions, and what I think the key details are. We're mainly going to look at the block save and the various one-on-one situations that arise from that. And I really want to highlight the importance of decision making in the application of that technique. What I've learned is that you have to train your decision making as much as your technique itself. So we'll look at the drills and practices that will help you achieve this, the ones I feel have helped me the most. And as part of that, we'll touch on the goalkeeper's role in dealing with overloaded counterattacks as well. And I also want to bring up the way I approach analysis of my own performance and how I think goalkeepers should be thinking critically about their own decisions and their own techniques constantly. I'm assuming there's a mix of players and coaches watching this, goalkeepers and outfielders, and I'm sure there'll be people at different stages of their exposure to futsal. So as I go, if you feel you want me to go into a bit more detail about something, or equally to take a couple of steps back and explain something a bit more, just shout up. There'll be some clear opportunities to discuss things in more detail at the end now. So let's crack on with this. First up, the block save, or the K save as it is commonly known. Probably the most essential save in futsal, and one of the more unnatural positions and techniques to learn if you're transitioning from football. I certainly found that myself. You do increasingly see it in football with the likes of De Gea, Edison, Alisson, but in futsal it's a much more integral part of the game, and that's because of the close range shots you receive, the number of 1v1 situations that arise. And all of this drastically reduces the reaction time that a goalkeeper has because you're playing on such a smaller, condensed pitch. And that's why getting your block shape technique right is so important. So to start with, we are going to look through some real technical details on the K shape. So I've just frozen this frame here, and I'll talk you through kind of the technical detail of this. So first up, look at my left knee. So you want that bend in your knee to be approximately 90 degrees. It's called the K shape because of the shape that your legs are in. You're creating that K shape. And if your knee's bent at that kind of 90-degree angle, it gives you a really strong base, allows you to keep your balance and to push back up in the same movement so you can pop back up to that set position. If you look at my trailing knee, it's not actually on the floor. You want to do this so you don't overcommit to the shape. If you end up with all your weight on that knee and it's hitting the ground, you're going to find it hard to pop back up. Equally, there's a bit of a gap, you'll notice there. and that's a good thing. You want a small enough gap that the ball can't fit through, obviously. What you don't want is that right knee overlapping with that left heel. If you do that, one, your balance is probably going to be off a bit, and two, you're reducing the width of the shape that you're covering. You want to hit that sweet spot of having the maximum width covered with your legs without offering a gap through the middle that a ball can fit through. And obviously, that calibrating that is something that is really important when you're learning this technique. The next thing to look at is my head and my chest position. So it's in a nice vertical line. I'm completely balanced. And you don't want to be forward, and you don't want to be falling backwards, or you don't want to be leaning too far forwards when you're making this shape. And equally, you don't want your body to be twisting away either way. You want that head position to be in dead line with the ball, the line of the ball and the attacker. And in that scenario, if I know my head position's in the right place, I know the rest of my shape will usually follow. Onto the hands. And this is crucial because obviously you're covering a deep and this is crucial because obviously you out with the lower half of your body. You've got quite a big bit to cover with your arms. And you're always going to have a weak side to your block. So in this scenario, obviously it's the right side. This right hand has a much bigger space to cover than this left hand, which has kind of got that bit there. And a key part of your decision making is figuring out which side to block. So which side is the ball more likely to go? And then you present your strongest block that side, you play the percentages. Another thing you'll see when keepers are executing the block is they're sweeping their hands forward. So that at the time of the point of contact with the ball, they're level in that shape, but they've brought them forward so that you can kind of deflect the ball forward. You just held your hands there, and you get a really powerful shock. It's going to knock you backwards. The ball might go backwards. So that's really important, and especially the timing of that sweeping movement. If you're moving it too late or too early, your block's going to be compromised. So that's a real quick summary of the purely technical detail of the block shape. I'm sure loads of you are familiar with that already. So if we just move on to the next slide. There are loads of drills out there to kind of talk you through the basic kind of principles of these techniques. Definitely recommend checking out all the stuff that's on the FA Boot Room. The likes of Tony Elliott, Andy Redding and Brenda Dix worked on some fantastic stuff. It's an amazing resource. It'll break down these techniques and develop them much better than I can. But what I want to show you is a drill that we've used loads with England and has been really instrumental in helping me understand my own decision-making process. And full credit to Andy Redding for this. It's his drill. And I want to kind of talk you through how you can dial up the complexity of it and therefore increase the amount of decisions that you're making according to how challenging you want it to be. Definitely go watch the full video if you haven't seen it already. But in essence, the drill, the ball can come from 3 different directions. The keeper has to quickly identify the threat and then react accordingly as the situation develops. So we'll just watch some of these clips now and hoping that they're going to work. So we're clearly focusing on the block shape here, identifying the 1v1. Bear in mind the technical detail. So the bent knee, the ability to pop back up those arms, sweeping forward. And for me, it always kind of comes back to that head position.
It's fine.
So if I know my head position is correct there, I can pop back up like I've done there. I've got another couple of ones to look at. Here we go. And again, the technical detail there, you can see how it works. And then finally, this last clip. Getting into line with the ball, stable head, popping back up straight away. Hopefully that video did work, but what I want to do is kind of, if it hasn't, I'm going to kind of talk you through the, where am I? Sorry. Let me go back a bit. So yeah, I'm going to talk you through each step of the decision-making process, and I've got some stills coming up of the video in case that video didn't work. But in my head, the way it works is you first got to identify the 1v1, you then engage it, but equally you've then got to recover, because you then might have to start that process all over again. So you're kind of going in that cycle. I'm going to explain that in more detail over the next few slides. So here we are. This is some stills from the clip, and I'm going to talk you through each stage. So in this scenario, the attacker's here, it's Crofty, and we're mimicking the attacker beating the last man. So my starting position here is really crucial. I've got to be in a position that anticipates the next threat, identify the danger area, and basically, as he makes that decision, I'm asking myself the question, is it a 1v1? So in this picture, there's no other attacker, there's no defensive cover, the angle's threatening, so it's my job to advance. However, if the angle was a bit tight, if he was wider coming in from the side, then I might not make that decision because that angle is less of a threat. Equally, if there was a passing line open to another attacker, then I might need to hold my position more. Those tend to be the questions you're asking yourself. So in this scenario, I've correctly identified it as a 1v1 situation. Next, it becomes about engaging that 1v1 and engaging your block and your technique. This will mean advancing, narrowing down that angle, and increasing the amount of goal that you can cover with your K-shape. But crucially, your movements have to be in relation to the attacker's movements. Here, you can see Crofty's taking that touch out to the right, and that's my opportunity to move, to advance forward, to get into the line of his next touch. So at this point of the process, the attackers and all the triggers are clearly showing he's setting up for a shot. His foot's pulled back, his head's down, his balance, etc. So that's my cue to execute the block shape technique. And like we discussed, you've always got a weak side to your block. So always it's a crucial decision to, do I block left or block right? But here, it's quite an easy one because of the way my momentum's going, because of the way he shifted the ball that way. It's a block to the left. And you've always got to be asking yourself that question. If this was at a different angle, it might be a different scenario. On to the next stage. This is the clip we saw earlier, the frame we saw earlier. You can see that my hands have swept forward so that the exact point of contact, they're level, completing that block shape. So I've actually made the save with my trailing right foot and my hand. Because my hand is sweeping forward, I've pushed that ball forward as well, and kind of taken it away from the danger area. But that isn't the end of the movement. Like I said, you've kind of got to recover in the same movement. So that's really important, and that's why I was talking earlier about that strong base. So because I've shifted all my momentum over to the left, all that force then goes through that left knee, and I've managed to keep my balance. My head's in a good space, a good shape. I can then pop back up straight away in the same movement, ready for the next phase. And that's critical because the ball might still be in play, so you might have deflected it straight back and you need to react straight away. But equally, the attacker might have feinted. He might have tried to roll around me, or he might have passed it. So it's crucial that you don't overcommit, lose your balance, and take yourself out of the game. So that's kind of a combination of the technical detail, but equally the decision making that's going through my head throughout the whole process. And it is a lot of information to process. So, you know, when you're making these saves all the time in training and in games, you are making these decisions all the time. And that's why, to improve as a goalkeeper or as a coach or whatever, you've got to understand how you're making those decisions, and then you implement drills where you can practice them and challenge yourself. So in this drill that we've looked at, the attacker only has one option, maybe two options. You can dribble and you can shoot, or you can dribble and you can try and go around you. But basically, you've limited the complexity of identifying that 1v1. So to develop the practice, you can make it more complicated, introduce more options for that attacker, and therefore require more decisions to be made by the goalkeeper. I'm going to show you on a tactics board now how you do that. So in this scenario, switch up the drill so that you give the attacker 3 different options, and therefore you amplify the amount of decisions that the keeper has to make it more challenging and more match realistic. So in this drill now, when the goalkeeper is going to turn around, there's a more complex scenario to process. The first, he's got to identify the ball. So in this scenario, it's going to be on the left. And then the attacker has 3 options. So he can shoot at you straight away. He can dribble forward, like we saw before. Or potentially, if this attacker on the other flank moves into the area, then that pass to the second post is open. So that requires an extra level of decision making from the goalkeeper. And I'll talk you through like how my brain works in that scenario now. So the first thing you've got to consider is you can't just rush out to the 1v1, because if the attacker shoots while you're on the move, you've not got a chance. So you first have to be set at your near post, ready for that potential shot. If the attacker shoots early, then you're set, you save it, great. If the attacker then takes another touch forward and takes himself into the box, you're now looking more like the 1v1 scenario we saw earlier. Your decision-making process follows that same pattern. You move when they move, when they take their touch, and you read their triggers to execute the right block technique. But then the third option of this player brings another layer of complication. You now need to be aware of that movement at the same time as watching the ball. And then, where am I? Yeah, you need to be aware of that position and not cheating, basically, because you might see him coming in, but you can't move until that pass has been made, because you can't compromise the security of that front post. You need to be able to make that save and do that first before you can deal with the one at the far post. 1 second. So, yeah, basically, if you start moving equally, if the attacker brings that player into the box and brings the ball into the box, and that man has also moved, you've then got another layer of complication, because you need to decide, is it more threatening that he is coming closer to my goal, or do I need to maintain that near post within my goal so that I can then recover to the back post? So it is a really challenging scenario, hopefully one you wouldn't face in a game where you've got 2 attackers versus with no defenders. But it is a really challenging one that really makes you think. And I think a drill like this should be challenging, and you shouldn't be saving every single part of the drill. You'll make wrong decisions and you'll execute the wrong technique, or simply the attackers will be too good and they'll score. But you really need to be able to make those mistakes, to train your decision making, and don't be scared of making those mistakes in training. If you're not making mistakes in drills like this, or if you're not doing drills like this, then you're not really challenging yourself enough and to keep driving yourself to improve. If you're not making mistakes in a drill, then you're probably not doing a drill that requires making match realistic decisions. And just one more point to say here is this drill really does mimic scenarios that happen all the time in games. So imagine that the false pivot started off centrally. He's pulled out wide. He then creates this space on the opposite flank for his teammate. Might be in a 1v1 with the last defender. If he beats that last player, he's then in pretty much this scenario. He can shoot at you. He can dribble to make it a 1v1, or that false pivot is lingering at the far post ready. And that's why drills like this, where you're really stressing your decision-making processes, are really critical to take into a game. And speaking of that, I'm going to take you on to some game scenarios and show you kind of how this process works in a game. Hope the video works. This was a game playing against Malaysia, I think, and I'm going to try and make the clip play. Hopefully you can see it. Hopefully that worked for everyone, but again, I'm going to show some stills just in case it didn't. So let's move on to the next slide. So in this scenario here, the attacker's got the ball. If I look at my position here, my starting position's all right, and I've got to think about my awareness of what the next phase might be. So I'm kind of set. I'm on the front foot, ready to react. This is obviously a potential 1v1 with this last defender. If he gets beat, then I'm kind of thinking there's not enough defensive cover from this guy. He's too far away. So this danger space then becomes my responsibility. So we take it on another frame. At that point, I've kind of made my decision and I've committed. So I've recognised that he's beaten the last man. I'm aware that this passing line to the opposite attacker is covered enough by my defender to rule him out of play. And therefore that, to me, triggers the response to take it into a 1v1, into advance. Equally, the angle of where he's coming from is a dangerous one. If I just stay on my line and he shoots from here, and I've got very little chance. So those are the things that my brain is thinking as that play is developing. And identifying it early is really crucial, because as you can see, because I've identified it early, his touch is relatively big and I've advanced quickly. I've basically executed a smother as the point he's shooting rather than a block from a couple of feet away. So because my decision making was really quick, I've had the opportunity to nullify that attack. And you can really see how the drills that we were doing in those videos directly translate into this scenario in the game. And the speed of decision, which we worked on in those drills, really helped me in this game. I've got another clip from another game. Let's move on to that. And this is a bit of a different scenario, but it's still one that requires good decision making, and it kind of highlights some of the technical detail we were talking as well. So I'll let it play through. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. There we go. The ball comes through. Clearly a very much a 1v1 scenario. Still playing. So hopefully you saw that video. If not, we'll take you through the stills again. So at this point, let me just get it up. So, like I said, this is as clear a 1v1 scenario as you're going to get, really. And there's no attackers, there's other attackers in play. There's certainly no defensive cover. It's just me and the attacker. But there's still really important decisions to make. So my first decision that dictates the rest of the play is to hold my position. And that's because he's got the ball under control. He's dribbling with it quite closely. There's no heavy touch that really allows me to advance and try and intercept out my area. So my first decision is to hold that line and hold my ground in the D so that I'm still able to use my hands, execute a proper save using my hands. As it advances, at this point, he's gone to shoot. All the triggers suggest that he's going to shoot. So I've got into my block shape, block to my left, thinking that that's probably the area he's going to shoot most at, and got myself in that position. Obviously, he's a talented player. He feints, doesn't actually shoot, and tries to take it around me. But because of the technical detail that we kind of talked through before, look at the nice straight line between my head, my chest, and my knee. My knee's not planted on the ground. I'm able to pop back up straight away as the play develops, as he takes it around me, recover, follow the line of his pass, and make a simpler block from a tighter angle, or face planting into the wall, if you saw that. But yeah, that kind of that process and those skills those points of the technical detail we looked at were really kind of in play there. And equally, the decision making of reading the attacker, reading if I can advance or not. That's kind of how my brain worked in that scenario. Take on to the next slide. So out and out 1v1s that we just saw are a really great thing to practice, and loads of teams will be doing this, like transition drills, where you start off in a 1v1 scenario, take it into a 2v1, and a 3v2, then a 4v3, etc. I'm sure loads of you have done that. And from a goalkeeper's point of view, I think these drills are so important and really great to think about, because with each phase, you're dialing up the complexity and the number of decisions that you have to make. So take the first one, the 1v1, like that clip we just saw against France. Your decisions are based purely on that one player. You're reading his triggers and his alone, really. But then the next phase in the 2v1, you're then having to work in unison and communicate with your one defender. You need to equalize the overload that's taking place, and you've got to take responsibility for a player to make it 2v2. And that decision on when to advance depends on similar factors. So the angle of play, is there an open passing line? But things also feed in, like the distance from goal. So you get to about 10 to 12 meters as a rule. And that's usually your trigger to advance to the ball and then leave your defender to follow that spare player to bring you into the game. Obviously, communication is critical and things like that. And when you take it into your 3v2 and then your 4v3, those sort of overload scenarios, you're dialing up the number of scenarios that you've got to analyze, and the number of decisions that you've got to make, and the amount of communication that required. It becomes more complex as well. So that's hardly a revolutionary drill. I'm sure loads of you have done it, like I said. But what I do think is really important from the keeper's perspective is to recognize the decisions that you're making in those increasingly complex scenarios, and to keep constantly evaluating them yourself. So ask yourself, was it the right decision? Did I make it early enough? Did I communicate my decision efficiently? Did I communicate with my teammate efficiently? And then ultimately, did I execute my own technique correctly at the end? You can't just build everything on analyzing if you did your technique correctly. There's much more to it than that. And I think this sort of analysis is obviously, it can be part of the coach's remit. But equally, I think there's a responsibility of the goalkeeper and also the wider goalkeeper unit, the other keepers in the teams. I feel that I've really improved by, one, having a better appreciation of the decisions that I'm actually making and actually thinking about it, not just doing them and not thinking about it. And two, by kind of developing this little habit of constant critical analysis of my performance, not in a negative way, but in like a strive to improve. And we do this all the time for England. When we do a drill, Redders will get us to tell us what we think went wrong if we've made a mistake, and he won't tell us. He'll let us figure it out ourselves, get our insight. And then, at Pro Futsal, I think me and Ben and the other keepers, and we're kind of constantly helping each other fine-tune the little details when we're doing drills like this. And it's important to recognise that, this isn't a negative thing. You've got to be open and honest with yourself and your other goalkeepers and focus on these little errors and mistakes. Because ultimately you're trying to reduce their occurrence. Use those little failures as an opportunity. Don't ignore them. Don't base your analysis just on a simple outcome. So don't just look at it and say, I made a save. Yeah, they scored. Don't judge it on those little things, those obvious things. You've got to recognize the effectiveness of your decisions in those situations as well. So I'm going to try and show this in a game scenario. So hopefully these videos will play. So this is a scenario, hopefully the video playing now, where a 2v1 develops. And ultimately, I don't make a save. And you could argue I haven't done much. But I really think there's a lot to take away from that in terms of decision making and communication. Just because there wasn't an obvious save from me doesn't mean it's not something valuable. So I'm going to go through, in case that video didn't show, I'm going to go through some screenshots again. So as this one is at this position now, when the 2v1 develops, there's clear communication between me and the last man. So at about this 11-meter line, we decide and we communicate that it's now my job to come out and engage if that ball is passed. My job to come and equalise that overload. I think my positioning is okay, and I'm ready to cover that spare man. Take it on a few frames. We've turned that 2v1 now into a 1v1. The last man here has done a brilliant job. He's covering the run to the second post, and he's taken that player out of the game. There's no longer a passing line there. It's now basically me and this attacker. But equally, there is now some substantial pressure coming from the recovering defender. So we've drastically increased the odds of us getting a positive outcome here. For me, I'm being critical. I think I can also be maybe another yard forward, be a little bit more aggressive. If we take it on to the point where the attacker makes his decision, he, at the point of engaging this 1v1, he decides that I'm blocking enough of the goal to make it hard enough for him to score, so he tries to pass to the other attacker. So part of this is doing really effective decisions at your end and making it a harder decision for your opponent. It's kind of like a game of chess when you break it down. And because we've worked together, me and the last defender, his clever positioning, my block, our communication, we've taken the attacker out of the game, and that ball is shepherded out with danger, and it goes out of play for our restart. And I think my point here is, don't simply judge your performance on the obvious outcomes. So if you make a great block, if I make a great block here, then it's clearly, we're celebrating a great save. But just because I haven't made that save doesn't mean that decision making hasn't been good. So look at the decision making behind it and celebrate that as well. Or not at least celebrate, but understand that that's a good thing that you've done. So our teamwork and communication here was really positive. And like I said, it turned that dangerous goal scoring position into our possession. I think a question just came through about how you make that communication, and that's really important to practice in training in those transition drills, because you've got such little time that it is really hard. It's got to be so concise, and you have to know, the defender needs to know what I'm going to say. So you've almost got to have a system. So I've probably said the way I usually do it is I say either man or ball to that last man. So I'll be saying man, man, man to him. So for him to stay with his man, and that means that I follow the ball. People probably have different ways of communicating, but you've got to build that kind of communication in with your teammates when you're training, so that you can then implement it in a scenario like this. Hopefully that made some sense. I'm going to look at one more example, because like I was saying, don't judge things on its outcome purely. It can work the other way. So sometimes you can make a great save that arises from a poor decision. So I'll play this clip and see what you think of it. Hopefully you can watch it now. You can all see it on screen. So I might get a lot of plaudits for that save, but I know that I made a bad decision in terms of my positioning. And I was pretty fortunate to end up making the save in the end. So I'll kind of break it down again in case the video didn't work. We'll just look at some moments and stills. So the ball gets lost down the wing. And in this scenario, my decision to advance to this position here is an incorrect one. It's not a good decision. He's got the ball here on a really tight angle. So really, I should be happy to sit inside my front post in a set position, and wait for either him to shoot, in which case I should be confident to deal with the shot. And equally, that means that if he does, it's not a 1v1 scenario. That's what I'm trying to get across, because he's very much, that number 5 is very much still an option. That passing line is wide open. So the decision for me to kind of half come into a 1v1 scenario is quite a bad decision. We take it on a slide. It's also really bad communication with the defender. We've both done half of the same job, and neither of us have done anything. We've both half gone towards him and then half gone back. So again, that's something to work on. If the number 5 here, if he shoots first time, I've got absolutely no chance. Look where I am. If he hits that, then he's hit it into an open net. Obviously, he takes a touch. I recover well, and I look like a hero. But 9 times out of 10, I probably wouldn't be able to make that save. Whereas if I make a better decision, I hold my position correctly at that near post, then if he does square it, I'm in a much better position to recover, make that recovery save, whether it's a split or a block. I'll cover a lot more of the goal. So I reckon it's more like 50-50 rather than 1 in 10. I'm not trying to be too harsh on myself there. It was a great save, whatever, but I could still celebrate that. But that's not enough if you want to improve, because the next time you might not make that save. So I tried to separate out that poor decision and make sure I learn from it for the next time. And for me, that's a really crucial mindset to develop for a futsal keeper. What I'm certainly not saying is that we should be encouraging a culture of slating the goalkeeper. Far from it. But between the coach, between the coach and between the other goalkeepers, I think it's really healthy to discuss these things, try and fine tune those little details, because it is really such a tough job being a goalkeeper, and even more so in futsal. And that's why you need to be striving to do everything you can to keep improving and looking at these tiny little details. Moving on. So just to sum up what I've just been through, hopefully it made sense. We've gone through like key technical detail of the block saves. Don't get me wrong, that technical detail and getting and perfecting your techniques is absolutely essential before you can progress. But it is important once you've got those techniques to try and progress to more complex practices. We've then seen how you can evolve one specific drill to challenge the keeper and to make more game realistic decisions, and how you can introduce increasing levels of complexity in terms of decision making. And I've kind of offered my insight into how I practice and understand this decision making process, and then we've kind of seen how that translates into a game scenario. I think the question has come through there about the levels, and I think that's kind of what I'm trying to say here is when you're playing it on an international stage and you're playing against really good opposition, you can't you have to make the right decision. You can't get away by recovering with great technique or reactions or a bit of luck. You really do get caught out. And so that's why my focus for a while has been trying to really fine tune these decisions. And I think that's what I've just kind of summed up here is develop this kind of habit of critical self-analysis, which I think is actually a really positive tool for goalkeepers. You kind of got to get past this taboo of not talking about things that go wrong. You really need to use it to improve and play it when you want to play at a high level. And I've said that judge your decision making as much as your technical ability, and hopefully that is like a pathway to really helping you understand why you might be making some saves, why you might not be making other saves. And remember, good saves can result from bad decisions, and equally, someone can score against you when you've made a good decision. So try and recognize that there's a difference between those things. Ultimately, you can increase your chance of making more saves through making better decisions. That's something that will really help you become better. Hopefully that's been like a helpful perspective, whether you're an actual goalkeeper, if you're an outfield player, or if you're a coach as well. I think that's what I want to kind of, if you're a coach, try and think of challenging your goalkeeper's decision making in the drills you give them, because this is only going to help them improve. You need drills that are prescriptive and that develop your lovely technique, but ultimately you've then got to take it to that next level where you train your brain as well. Kind of training is getting your body to go into that autopilot mode and execute those lovely correct techniques, but in a game And especially, like I said, when you're playing against like top teams, you don't get the chance to execute those techniques if you make the wrong decision and you get in the wrong position. Um, and yeah, like I said, the higher level you play, the more important decision making becomes. Um, and like any skill, you have to train your decision making. Um, I think I just saw a question pop up there, like how can you kind of work on that at home? And obviously that is really hard in the current scenario. But what I would definitely advocate is trying to watch, a top level game, watch some of the games in Spain, and watch a full game. Don't just watch the highlights. Watch a full game, and just watch the goalkeeper, um, and try and understand his decision making process on the things that don't make the highlights. The way he's come out in that scenario, the way he's held onto the ball for a bit longer there, the way he's got rid of the ball because it's a dangerous scenario. Those little things, and try to understand that will really improve. And you can do that now. There's hours of footage on YouTube. But yeah, definitely watch futsal top level and put yourself in the goalkeeper's position and understand their decision making. Obviously, you can't do too much yourself at the moment. So for all we can do at the moment now is try and keep fit and healthy and keep your flexibility going and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, definitely watch top level goalkeepers and get in their head. That's kind of most of my presentation done. Did anyone else have any other questions? Does anyone want to open up and discuss something? Any other techniques? Anything that I've covered? Floor is open if anyone wants to chip in with anything.
So that's great, Sim. I can see a lot of questions already popping up on the side.
Yeah, I probably missed a load of them. Sorry.
Yeah, so Phil said that he's seen a difference of opinion and techniques on the trailing leg and the way the ankle should be. I've seen a lot of people with different techniques. His reading of this is that the back heel should be pointing up and toes to the floor. If you have any clarification on this.
Yeah, so I think I know what you mean in that if you have a bit of a bend in your leg, your heel's going to be up a bit more, and they are therefore covering a bit more space. Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, it's in the cross shape.
Yeah, and yeah, that is obviously everyone has slightly different tweaks on their technique, and I think that is hard to what am I trying to say? I think in that scenario, so the one that I was looking at, I've kind of shifted all my body weight to the left. So my left leg is kind of trailing behind me, and my foot is kind of flat on the floor. And I think in that scenario, that's probably because I'm moving. And I think there are definitely ways you can always improve the area that you're covering. But one thing that I can't remember who told me it, but they always said it's better to get in a position at the time the ball is being struck than trying to get in the perfect position and doing it half a second too late. Things aren't necessarily always as clear cut when you're in a game scenario. So obviously, yeah, like you want that trailing foot to be a little more bent to offer you that little bit extra barrier. And yeah, definitely. But it's not always quite as easy as that in a game scenario. But hopefully that kind of answered that.
Yeah, he's also asked what's the communication, and is it a shout or is it purely reading body language?
Yeah, I think that was in our transition thing that we were talking about. I think I tried to kind of say before, you kind of need to build in those like almost one word helpful little commands with your defender. So like I said, it's either man or ball, and then they'll follow the man. If I shout man, if they follow the ball, and they'll follow the ball. But I don't know. Maybe it's a question for the defenders whether they actually listen to me in that scenario. I think a lot of it is instinct, and you react off what your teammates doing. So equally, you get scenarios where I might want the defender to follow the man, and he doesn't, and that's as much a decision made for me as well. I've then got to take the man with the ball if the defender's fade. with the other player. So it's kind of six and two threes. I think you build in the understanding with your teammates. You try and help it with with the communication, but a lot of it is kind of that instinctive reacting off your body position as well.
Cool. So Louis asked, at international level, how much time is spent analysing the opposition players in terms of their shooting preferences and body shapes they make to enable you to select the correct techniques?
Yeah, so we do a lot of work on the opposition and a lot of work on ourselves. So some of those clips, if the videos you saw, they came from Huddle. We've got like video analysis technology, and Andy Redding, the coach, will create loads of stuff for us to look at. We'll look at different scenarios, like identifying 1v1s. We'll look at players if they've got a pivot who likes to turn and shoot, that sort of thing. Which way they prefer, what their strong foot is. So when you have the footage and you've got the time to prepare for like a series of games or a tournament, then yeah, we do loads of video analysis on that sort of thing. And when you've got a good coach like Redders is, he'll build in the training to mimic the style of play that we know we're going to come up against, so that we're then mimicking um, the decisions that we're going to be making in the game and practicing those decisions. So yeah, obviously when you're playing at international level, you've got the access to all those videos. But in the league at the moment, we should be learning how our position. We should be learning how our play. And you might not be able to go into the same level of detail, but you can start to build a picture in your head of how they're going to play and where the threats are going to come from, and you can kind of start expecting the sort of decisions that you're going to be making.
So following on from that, interesting question from David. He's put, do you find you face different shot techniques against international players? So I know a lot of Spanish players hit it more with their laces and toes, which causes a bit of a dip. And it's not a technique that you see here, but do you find that international level that you face different type of shot techniques that you would at domestic level?
Yeah, I'd say you're facing better shots, always more powerful. There's always the tempo and the power behind them. You feel straight away, and that's why it's really important, to warm up correctly to get yourself as switched on as possible. In terms of those kind of like those toe punts where they kind of cut across, yeah, you come across different teams that use them. Obviously, we all know the impact of a toe poke and how difficult it is to read because you've got that short back lift. I know certain players like Rayoni, Vlad, when I was playing at Helvetia, they used to do those levels of shots. So for me, when I played at Helvetia and was training with really high, like that was my first kind of experience of a really high quality training week in, week out. That kind of helped me improve because you were getting more of an accurate representation of the shots you're going to face when you get to international level. I think as well, it's when you're playing teams like that, and if you choose the wrong option, then they will get punished. So if you come out too soon and too quickly, they'll dink it over you. They'll take it round you, that sort of thing. So I think, yeah, like those kind of toe pokes, the accuracy and the power that a lot of international teams get from them are massively different. And equally, the accuracy of those little dinks over, you don't see that quite as much in our league. But it's such a difficult thing to defend when you're the goalkeeper because you've got to stay big for as long as possible. I know Rayoni does that loads. The amount of times he's hit me in the face when we're doing a warm up in a game. But then that's good practice because you're keeping yourself as big as possible, not compromising the block for your legs as well. So yeah, it's definitely much harder.
Yeah. So how long have you been playing futsal, and when did you first access futsal specific goalkeeper training? Have you been self taught to a certain degree, or more coach led?
So yeah, I've been playing 9 years now. I started in my first year at university. I was really lucky that I joined the university futsal team, and we had Junior Roberti, the current head coach of York. He was the coach there, so he was the coach there. So initially, he taught me the techniques. As I developed and I got into I got selected for the England development squad. It was called at the time. Now the 19s and the 21s. Then I had coaching from like Tony Elliott, from Brendan Dix, from Andy Redding. So I started off probably not having that much dedicated goalkeeper coaching, but then as I got more access to the England program, I got some absolutely top quality coaches, and they helped me improve so much. And I've learned so much from all of them. I think the positive nowadays, 9 years on, there is a lot more knowledge out there, and there's especially in this country, there's much more awareness and much more access. I look at the resources that I showed earlier on the FA Boot Room website. The content that is being created there, it's accessible for everyone. It's really top quality coaching that everyone can get on their phone. So I kind of wish I'd picked up futsal, when I was 10 or 11 or even younger, so I could have developed these techniques earlier. And hopefully, the kids of today are doing that. And whether you're 15 or you're 17 or whatever, you're not picking it up later on in your career like I did. So yeah, I think the way futsal's going in this country, it's really positive. So.
That's it. What were you playing before? So what's your football background before futsal?
Yeah, so I played football all the way up until I finished university. I was too small as a goalkeeper to kind of develop to to that kind of professional level. I played a decent semi-professional level. Played throughout university as well. So for me, football was my passion, and I absolutely loved it. But equally, I was always kind of tinged with a bit of like, I felt like I was good enough, but I wasn't tall enough, and so I never got the chance to try and play for a decent club. I played a lot of rugby and a lot of cricket as well, so I kind of, when I started playing futsal and kind of got the taste for it, that was when I started really focusing just on futsal. And when I kind of started getting opportunities with England and that pathway to play at an elite level, that's when I really got the bug for it and was really grateful for starting to play it in the first place.
So for goalkeepers in the foundation phase, so under 10s, under 11s, coming from football into futsal, what would you focus on K block straight away in terms of teaching techniques?
So yeah, I think it's to start. Obviously, those technical elements. That was quite a detailed summary that I did. But just to practice getting into those shapes, because like I said, it is quite an unnatural position. The closest way that I got taught it was like a long barrier in cricket. It's obviously not identical to that, but to get that movement, make that a natural part of your game, that's the first step. And when you're younger and you're under 10s, it's kind of developing that habit of kind of being tough and not twisting away, because the ball is getting shot at you from like 2 yards away. The instinct is to turn your head away. If you can, if you can kind of train yourself not to be like that, it's much better to be hit square on in the face than when you're twisting away, that sort of thing. It's like volleyball keepers. That's how they're taught. They're taught to kind of have their head in, so that it's hitting you and it's bouncing off. It's hitting you in the chest, and you're not twisting away from it. So I think that is a good thing to learn when you're becoming the goalkeeper for the first time in futsal. Like I said, there's loads more qualified people to teach you the basic principles, how to learn that. But I'd say that making that a natural part of your game and those movements natural is really important if you're starting out when you're 10 years old or whatever.
So a bit more of a technical question now, where Paul's asked, in the scenario when you're prepping for the 1v1 and deciding the strong and weak side, based on where we might shoot. Would you adjust that if you're expecting another attacker at the second post? Strong side is always the direction of the second attacker.
Yeah, so that's really good detail. So say you're in that quite exposed position where you've got a second post option, and you've got a 1v1 scenario almost playing out at the same time. My kind of advice is to make the decision as difficult for the attacker as possible and kind of delay his decision. The longer you delay that scenario, the more chance you've got of cover coming back. But like you said, if you can do a block shape that is also cutting out a little bit of his passing line and having that stronger side on that side, where you might even be able to go from your block into more of a split shape, then yeah, that those little details are really key to pick up on.
Class. So a bit more of a psychological question now is how do you recover mentally from a mistake that might have cost you the game or a goal?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, and it's something I was thinking of talking about here is raising is how you deal with mistakes. And initially, so say you have just conceded a goal, and you know you've made a mistake. The absolute first thing is just to be strong enough and to practice just switching off and forgetting about it, because the worst thing you can do is dwell on it at that time. So I remember when I was Tony Elliott always used to say to me, just get that mistake, put it in your box, come back to it later. Because the last thing you want to be doing is thinking about that mistake when the game's still playing out. And you say that, and I know I'm saying that, and it's almost impossible to do. But you've really got to focus on the now. And as soon as the game's over, then you kind of revisit the mistake and kind of, like I kind of said, don't just look at it as it was a goal. Look at, was my decision making good enough? Or was it purely just a technical thing? Was it a lapse in concentration? Was it, what was the cause of it? Don't beat yourself up because, I say that I've always beaten myself up about it. I always kind of will a little bit. Maybe you need that little hour where you stew or you're moody in the shower and you don't talk to anyone. Get it out your system, and then you kind of move on from it and you kind of get to the bottom of it and you figure out how you don't make it again, because mistakes happen. And especially, like we say, as a goalkeeper, you're so much more exposed that you've got to find a way of dealing with it. You can't just, it's unrealistic to expect yourself to not make those mistakes. So obviously you're pissed off that you make it, but you've got to eventually turn that into a positive and hopefully try and learn from it.
Interesting one following on from that. We spoke a lot with Joe last week in regards to, and particularly yourself, because you twin tracked at university where you played futsal and football. Be interesting to hear your insight on how making more frequent mistakes in a futsal training or futsal games or being exposed to more mistakes helped your football. In terms of taking that small side mentality where you're a lot more under the cosh, a lot more under pressure, and like you said, making mistakes in training. Did it affect your football in a positive sense in terms of your psychology, or did you not feel that it helps at all?
I think it does. Like we said, as a futsal goalkeeper, one of the reasons we love it so much because you're so much more involved in the game. You're making it so much because you're so much more involved in the game. You make 5 or 6 times more saves than you would in a football game, and therefore statistically, you're going to make more mistakes. You're going to concede more goals. You're going to make and like I think that is a good point, that it's kind of getting over being afraid of those mistakes. It's really, like I said, it's really tough being a futsal goalkeeper. You're so exposed in a way you're not in football. So don't beat yourself up too much when goals go in, or you should hate it as a goalkeeper. You should hate conceding a goal, and I do. But you've got to kind of realize that is just part of the game, and part of the frustration of the game is you're going to make mistakes and concede goals. And if, like you said, you can take the positives of those mistakes and that resilience that you build into your game, into playing 11 aside, then I think you're definitely going to be more resilient and more, more resilient if you do make a mistake in a football game.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of final questions, and they're both related around penalties. You got one
Yep.
from your colleague at England, Joe Payne, and he said, "Use your choice of technique for a 10-meter pen is also a block shape. For you, is there anything that changes about the block during the 10-meter that is different to the live game?"
I think sometimes you'll see people doing a wider stance at the risk, obviously, of it going through that little gap in the centre. But you might sometimes see a slightly wider block that takes up more of the goal. And then I think the kind of counter to that, to try and defend, you then almost have to, because you're getting into that shape a little bit earlier, probably. And then you kind of almost use your trailing knee if the ball does try and go through your legs to cover that gap. I'd say sometimes that is the difference. But again, I think it's reading the opponent. So if you've advanced and you're going into a block, it's having a rough idea in your head which way you think they're more likely to go, but reading their body language as they run up, that's crucial to me. I think you've got to kind of read the triggers of what is their body shape angling up to do, and then you initiate the block that way, play the chances, because you don't have reaction time. You don't have enough reaction time to just rely on it. You've got to give yourself benefit of the odds, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then Sam's elaborated on that and put, what are your tips on penalty saves? So I don't know if you want to cover the 10-meter ones a little bit more, and then of course 6-meter ones as well.
Yeah, so 10 meters. I sometimes do both. I sometimes hang back and I sometimes go forward. So, and part of the reason I do that is if you can be making the attacker question what he's doing when he's approaching, that's only a good thing for you. So sometimes I'll start. Typically you'd either stay on your line or you'd come as far as you can forward to the block. So I'll sometimes start in the middle, and then I'll either drop back to my line to give myself the most chance to react, or then I'll take those extra 2 steps forward as he's approaching in his run up. And I find that works so because you're kind of changing his picture at the last moment and hopefully casting a bit of doubt into his mind. So that would kind of be my tip on 10 meters. That works for me. Sometimes it might not. Some people just prefer to stand on that, the edge of where they can be and get as big as possible from the start. And that does certainly work. But sometimes I think you can psychologically kind of get in the head of the penalty taker. In terms of 6 meters, they're hard. You've just got to guess, haven't you? You can't. You've got to. I think there's different ways of doing it. Some people will get into more of a block shape. Some people will literally just shuffle from one side to the other, stay as big as they can, and hope it hits them. I think you've just got to find what works for you. Because if basically they're just going to run up and smash it as hard as they can, and you've just got to try and guess where it's going and stay strong. That's the big thing. You've got to expect it to hit you and make sure that you're angling it forward so that it doesn't hit you and go in.
And try not to break your ankle as well.
Yeah.
So there's a couple more questions here. We'll just do these couple, and then we'll call it a day. And then if anybody else has got any more questions, sure, Johnny will be happy to answer those over Twitter or Insta, wherever you can get him on. So Joe's asked, from when he's seen you play, you seem to switch between being gloved and playing gloveless. Where are you at this with now, and why?
Yeah, so if I kind of track back to when I first started playing all those years ago, I certainly started playing with full-on goalie gloves. Playing without gloves was pretty unnatural for me. So for the first probably 2 or 3 years when I was playing up in York. Yeah, I wore full-on goalie gloves. Um, I then started wearing the specialist futsal gloves, where you have obviously the fingers cut off. I played with them for probably 2 or 3 years as well, and they're kind of a good transition if if you're still feeling uncomfortable having not going gloveless. But for me, I eventually built up getting used to not having the gloves on, and for me, it's all down to distribution, being able to just have that control of the ball, more control on where it goes, and also I think once you tape your wrists up and you realize that you're not trying to catch the ball all the time, you get your hands in a strong enough position. You realize that actually, if you're confident enough and you're not thinking about it too much, then you don't actually need them. You kind of build the strength in your hands and your wrists, and you're not necessarily needing the gloves at all. So yeah, I haven't played with gloves for a year or maybe 2 years now at least, maybe more.
Cool. And then last one that I'm going to ask is, what sorts of throwing technique do you use in a game? And I know you haven't really gone over that, so it'd be interesting to hear that to sort of wrap
Yeah,
this up off.
I started doing some slides on throwing, and then realised this was going to be about 2 hours long if I went into it. But yeah, so obviously the main difference when you're in football to futsal is you don't really see that many kind of straight arm bowls that you do in football. It's almost always those kind of javelin throws where you're throwing it kind of like a quarterback in American football. And within that, obviously you've still got your rolls out where you roll it underarm, and they're still really important. You've still got to zing those in and get them into feet really quickly. But within that throwing technique, you still have different types of throws. So you've got the ones where you want to throw it as flat, as hard as possible into someone's chest or along the floor into their feet. Or maybe you've got a bit more loop on it, and you're kind of throwing it over a player and you're getting it to bounce. So for me, the different ways that you achieve those techniques is the kind of how close you are to the floor, and position, and how much. So if you get really close to the floor when you're throwing it and bend over loads, then you're going to be able to zing it along the floor better. If you're aiming to hit it into someone's chest, then you're kind of aiming to hit it into someone's chest and releasing it from that chest level. Then equally, if you're going more up and over, you're releasing it from that head level. So that's kind of my check technically on different types of distribution when I'm throwing it.
Cool. So great, let's say, presentation, great questions, and great answers. To be fair, Sim, it's been really insightful, and I hope everybody's really enjoyed it. We'll make this available to download as soon as possible as well. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and doing this for us as well. So I want to thank you for that, and thank everybody for, let's say, tuning in and sort of helping us out in terms of giving you questions as well.
Yeah, cheers for asking me to do it, Juan, and thanks for everyone tuning in. Like Juan said, drop me a line on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and I'm happy to answer any other questions or whatever. But yeah, hopefully that was useful, and yeah, thanks for watching.
Class, we'll be back again next week, guys. We'll be doing a new thing on Wednesday, which is a question and answer live, and then we'll be back on Friday and Saturday with webinars with 2 more presentations. So thanks a lot, and see you soon.